began right after World War II. It was caused by the USSR, otherwise known as the Soviet Union, having conflicts with the United States. The Cold War took place from 1947 to 1991. The Soviet Union contained powerhouses like Russia, while the United States contained alliances like NATO, which included West Germany, who joined on May 5, 1955. One of the reasons this started is because the US wanted to challenge the Soviet Union. The two had always had tension between the two. It started when the two were allies, trying to take down non-allied forces. The relationship grew very rocky because of the United States' feelings towards the Soviets' communism. The Soviets were frustrated with the United States because the refusal to treat the USSR or the Soviet Union as a legitimate part of the international community. Also, a huge part is how late the US entered World War II, which took the lives of millions of Russian people. After the end of World War II, the distrust among the two countries escalated. When the Soviet expanded into Eastern Europe, this caused increased distrust even further because the Americans feared that the USSR was attempting to take over the world. But also, the man who led the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, did not trust the Americans in any way. Why this was called the Cold War was because there was no actual war. It was just the fear of war, which both countries used to their advantage to get what they wanted. Both sides had something equally destructive to use to their advantage. The US had one of the most dangerous bombs at the time. It was a nuclear bomb called the A-bomb, which was very dangerous, and the Soviet Union did not want the US to use that. To which the Soviets had one of the best armies in the world, so both were held at a threshold. One of the first major conflicts that caused the Cold War was called the Berlin Blockade. It lasted for only a year, so during 1948 to 1949, the West, or the United States, had no access to railroads or roads in Berlin. Because of the Soviets, they blocked all access off. That caused the West to create the Berlin Airlift on June 6, 1948. This made it possible to fly in supplies to Berlin. This was used till September 1949. Then the USSR wanted to calm everything down. They did not want to create more conflicts, so they just ended it. But the effects of this were huge. It created something called the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened in 1962. It was when, during a short piece of history, the US and Soviets had a meeting talking about a missile crisis in Italy and Turkey. This almost went big fast. Luckily, it did not turn into a full-out nuclear war. That could have happened. The most important factors to have thought to be the main causes of the Cold War was first, the US's intent to stop communism. They hate the idea of it. They did not want the Soviet Union's idea of communism to spread all over the world. They just wanted to stop it right then and there. The Soviet Union wanted to stop the spread of democracy, which the US was trying to promote around the world. So they argued about that. The Soviets wanted to spread communism all over the world. They started in Eastern Europe and planned to go everywhere in the world. They wanted to become the strongest nation in the country, and they wanted to become stronger than ever. A misconception about the Cold War is that it was one giant war, but in reality, it was many different wars or conflicts. It was very much a combination of small conflicts. This was called proxy wars. Proxy wars are wars that are started by opposing powers who don't directly fight against each other, but they use instead their third parties to do the fighting. For example, the three probably biggest proxy wars in the Cold War were the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and the Greek Civil War. The most famous of the three is probably the Korean War. It was when the north side of Korea, which was communist, invade the South. The United States did not like this, while the Soviets did. The conflict, even though much bigger than the Greek Civil War, ended up being a tie, so they realized nothing was solved yet. Then right after all of this happened, the Vietnam War happened. The tension got worse and worse over time and just kept going. The United States sent a hard message and it stated that the U.S. were not scared to go to places that had communists. This caused another proxy war. The U.S. started sending troops to southern Vietnam, which was not under communism under the time, like its counterpart, North Vietnam. Richard Nixon created a policy that made so that the U.S. had to help South Vietnam through this war. This pretty much led to nothing. Finally, in December 1991, the Soviet Union fell and split into 15 separate countries. It was a big relief to the United States because the Cold War finally came to an end, and they had won. This changed the world in many different ways over the years. This caused many different alliances all over the world. One of the biggest effects on the world is what happened to Russia. First, the Russian military had the amount of money put into it dramatically cut and lowered due to the loss in the war. Also, a lot less people got employed in the military because of the fund cuts. But another bad thing that happened to Russia is that their economy was so bad and got so much worse than where it was before the war. It was said to be worse than the Great Depression the United States experienced during the 1920s. During this time of the day we live in today, Russian economy has improved, but still needs to improve much more because it is still in a very bad spot right now. On the other hand, the U.S. has come out of the war with a lot of power since the win in the Cold War. We have a lot of troops in our armies, and we have a lot of alliances with other countries around the world. Out of the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the U.S. has become way more successful out of this, and the Soviet Union has paid the biggest price. Many lives were lost between the Korean and Vietnam War. Over 100,000 Americans died. But just because the Cold War ended doesn't mean everything it causes ending. There are still conflicts from the Cold War. This is just because it is over doesn't mean it has been solved. But now the good things such as more money to military and government, also more high-tech technology such as weapons have come out of this to keep us more safe. Badly though, the countries and areas that did not have as much as strong weapons at the time now do. This could place more problems on the world and could cause another Cold War because of the raising terrorist attacks lately, and the amount of awareness everyone has brought more fear to the people of the U.S. and the people all around the world. So we must be careful.